Part 1. This happened when I was 14 years old. During winter break, I went to visit my uncle's vacation house in N Prefecture. Though he was technically my uncle, he was still in his 30s at the time. Originally, he had planned to take his girlfriend there, but they had recently broken up. So instead, he invited me along. Since I had always been close to him growing up, I was more than happy to go. My uncle lived in the same city as me, so he picked me up early in the morning and we set off on our trip. He was a stylish guy, always introducing me to different hobbies, outdoor activities, music, and all sorts of fun things. I looked up to him a lot. The drive was long, about 8 hours one way, but we spent the time chatting, listening to music, and stopping along the way to check out interesting spots. The road trip itself was already a blast. As we neared our destination, we stopped by a supermarket to pick up food for dinner, then continued on, driving up a steep mountain road until we finally reached his vacation house. It wasn't too big, but it had a cozy, rustic wooden lodge feel, like a hidden retreat. A little further down, I could see 2 or 3 other vacation homes, but they seemed unoccupied. That night, we had a barbecue outside. The meat was nothing fancy, just the usual cheap cuts, but somehow, grilled over charcoal, it tasted incredible. We also cooked some offal, seafood, and vegetables, and ate until we were stuffed. We even cooked rice in a campfire pot, making it the perfect meal. After dinner, we went inside and hung out in the room with a fireplace, watching TV, playing PlayStation, Super Famicom, and even an old Famicom. At one point, my uncle even showed me an underground video. At that time, I was still a virgin, so it left quite an impression on me. As the night wore on, we got into scary stories. My uncle was great at telling them, so good, in fact, that it genuinely freaked me out. If I get the chance, I'd love to write down some of those stories too. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, my uncle muttered, "Never go into the backwoods." Apparently, even the locals avoided it. He mentioned that you could find Matsutake mushrooms there, but almost nobody dared to enter. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Oh yeah, a businessman who owned one of the vacation homes nearby hanged himself in those woods years ago." Hearing that, I thought, yeah, no way in hell I'm going in there. We kept talking and playing games until around 5 a.m. before finally calling it a night. Part 2. Sunlight streaming into the room woke me up. It was already past noon. Feeling thirsty, I headed downstairs for some water. On the way, I peeked into my uncle's room. He was still fast asleep, snoring away. Despite the chill in the air, the morning felt incredibly refreshing. The mountain air was nothing like what I was used to in the city. I returned to my room and stepped onto the balcony, sinking into a chair. From there, I had a perfect view of the mountain behind the house. At a glance, it looked like an ordinary forested hill, nothing particularly unusual. Then I remembered the telescope in the room. I carried it out onto the balcony, eager to take a closer look at the scenery. It was a high-performance model, expensive, and the clarity was incredible. I could see the distant town, and even individual birds perched in the surrounding trees. The crisp detail mesmerized me, and before I knew it, I had been staring through the lens for nearly half an hour. Then, as I scanned the trees on the mountainside, something moved in my field of vision. A person? Their back was turned to me. They were completely bald, their smooth head gleaming in the daylight. Their entire body swayed rhythmically, almost like they were dancing. A local villager, maybe? Some kind of ritual? Then I noticed something gleaming in their hand, a sickle. And what unsettled me the most? They were completely naked. In the dead of winter. My thoughts scrambled to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe it was some kind of obscure festival? But if so, why was this person alone? An uneasy feeling gripped me, though I couldn't quite pinpoint why. Their back was still turned, so I couldn't see their face. Something about their movements reminded me of Budo, the avant-garde Japanese dance troupe Sankaijuku. I shouldn't be watching this. The thought surfaced instinctively. This was just a person. Probably. But something about them felt wrong. Deeply wrong. I wanted to look away. But I didn't. Curiosity overpowered instinct. I adjusted the telescope's zoom to its maximum. Now I could see everything in disturbing clarity. The bald scalp, unnaturally smooth. The skin, unnervingly pale. A chill ran down my spine. Then, in slow motion, as if sensing my gaze, it turned around. For a split second, I still thought it was human. It had a nose, a mouth, a face, but no eyebrows. And right in the center of its forehead, one single, vertical eye. My entire body seized with terror. A cyclops? A malformed human? A hallucination? My brain refused to process it. But what sent me over the edge was its expression. It was smiling. A grotesque, twisted grin. Then, it looked straight at me. Through the telescope. Our eyes locked, and something inside me snapped. Wah! I screamed. I couldn't stop the tears. A crushing, unbearable despair flooded over me. A suffocating, all-consuming darkness. I wanted to die. No rational thought, just an overwhelming, incomprehensible urge to end everything. I stumbled, sobbing uncontrollably, clawing at my own skin. Die. 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 I had to. I could barely breathe, panic taking over. Then, suddenly, the door burst open. My uncle. Part 3. What the hell is wrong? A monster. What? The telescope. The mountain. My uncle snatched the telescope and pressed his eye to the lens. Then, a guttural, strangled noise escaped his throat. His body trembled violently, and suddenly, he collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. Tears and snot ran down his face as he sobbed uncontrollably. I'd never seen him like this before. The sheer raw horror on his face made my blood freeze. For a moment, I forgot my own terror. I hesitated, then asked, "What? What the hell is that thing?" My uncle didn't answer. Instead, he just kept sobbing. Calling out a name. A woman's name. His ex-girlfriend's name. Ooko. Ooko. His cries became an incoherent mess of sorrow and despair. This was bad. Really bad. Something was seriously wrong with him. Instinctively, I did something I'd never done before. I raised my hand and slapped him hard. The sharp crack echoed in the silent room. My uncle's head snapped to the side. For a moment, he just sat there, body shaking, breathing ragged. Then, slowly, he turned to look at me. His eyes were bloodshot, but there was clarity in them again. And then he whispered, "Evil eye. What?" "Listen. In my room. The desk drawer. There's a pair of sunglasses. Bring them. Get one for yourself too." "Why?" "Just go." His sudden shout jolted me into action. I rushed to his room and yanked open the drawer. Inside were several pairs of black sunglasses. Grabbing two, I ran back to the balcony. Uncle snatched one, slipping it onto his shaking hands, then pressed the telescope to his face again. He adjusted the focus, scanning. A moment later, he gasped. His face twisted in disgust. Then, he waved me over. "Put them on. Look." I hesitated. My hands trembled as I put on the sunglasses. Even through the tinted lenses, I could still see it. That thing. The one-eyed figure. Its grotesque, elongated limbs wriggled unnaturally as it continued its grotesque dance. The mere sight of it sent a wave of nausea through me. But it wasn't as bad as before. The sunglasses were helping. I could feel fear sinking its claws into my gut, but it wasn't the same soul-crushing despair from earlier. Then, I noticed something even more terrifying. It wasn't standing in the same place anymore. It was moving. Still swaying, still dancing, but getting closer. Coming down the mountain. Moving toward us. And the whole time, that vertical eye stayed locked onto mine. Part 4. Oh, do you have to piss? What the hell kind of question is that right now? If you do, there's an empty plastic bottle in the kitchen. Go fill it. Without waiting for my response, my uncle left the room and went downstairs. The hell is wrong with him? Even if I wanted to piss, there was no way I could right now. My body was frozen with fear. A few minutes later, my uncle returned, holding a bottle of yellow piss. "If you need to go, use this." He handed me an empty bottle. My brain refused to process the absurdity of the situation. "No, seriously, what the hell is that thing?" My uncle sighed and sat down, rubbing his temples. "A creature of the mountain. Ayamako. I don't know exactly. But when I was a kid, I used to go camping with my dad a lot. Not in this mountain, somewhere else." His voice lowered. "Strange shit happens in the mountains. At night, you hear voices outside your tent. Like people talking. But when you check, there's no one there. And you know what? If you piss around your tent, the voices stop." I stared at him in disbelief. What the fuck kind of logic was that? But something about his dead serious expression made me hesitate before calling him crazy. He lifted the telescope again, grimacing as he looked through it. "It's still moving." "How fast?" "I don't know. Slow. Really fucking slow. But it's definitely coming this way. A chill ran down my spine. Then let's get the hell out of here. Won't work. What? It's fixated on us now. As long as it stays interested, it'll follow. No matter where we run. This is a curse. Ever heard of apostrophe, Joshi? It means evil eye. I swallowed hard. That word again. Why the hell do you know so much about this? My uncle's face darkened. When I was working in Northern Europe. In a certain town. No. If we survive this, I'll tell you. If we survive? Are we just gonna sit here and wait for that thing? No. He looked at me, eyes burning. We're gonna fight it. Part 5. I was completely against the idea of going after it. But my uncle insisted. We need to deal with it before it reaches the lodge. I thought he was crazy. Why the hell would we walk towards that thing when we could be running in the opposite direction? But Uncle had always been the kind of person you could rely on. I respected him. So, in the end, I decided to follow his lead. We packed everything we could think of. Sunglasses. Plastic bottles filled with piss. A light bag of food. Binoculars. A wooden bat. Flashlights. Then, we headed into the backwoods. The plan was simple, stop it before nightfall. Even though we were wearing sunglasses, I had no idea if we could withstand its gaze up close. Through a telescope, it had been horrifying. What would happen if we were face to face? I didn't want to find out. The forest was vast. We used binoculars to scan our surroundings, knowing that it was coming toward us. Uncle's logic was this. Since it's locked onto us, we'll meet sooner or later. We walked about 500 meters from the lodge and stopped at a clearing. We'll wait here. My hands were sweaty. The sun was starting to dip. I didn't want to be out here after dark. We just need to break its focus. How? Listen carefully. This is important. First, we have to get close, but don't look directly at it. Look at it from an angle, like this. He turned his head slightly, demonstrating. Never make eye contact. Then, we throw the piss at it. My stomach twisted. What if that doesn't work? Uncle hesitated. Then he said, dead serious? We show it our dicks. I blinked. Excuse me? Joshi, hate impure things. Things like excrement. Or genitals. I stared at him, waiting for him to say just kidding. He didn't. This won't kill it. But if it runs, we live. And if it doesn't? Then we run like hell. We sat in absolute silence. Perched on a rock, gripping our binoculars. Watching. Waiting. Drenched in fear. The clock hit 4 p.m. The sun would set in 2 hours. And somewhere, deep in the trees, it was still coming. Part 6. Wake up, bro. A voice. A voice I should never be hearing again. It was my little brother's voice. He had died in an accident when I was 10 years old. Wake up, bro. You're gonna be late for school. Annoying. Just 3 more minutes. If you don't wake up, you're gonna die. I jolted awake. I wasn't supposed to fall asleep. Had I been forced to sleep? My heart pounded as I turned to my uncle. Still asleep. I shook him violently. Wake up. Uncle jerked upright. We both glanced at his watch. 5:30 p.m. The sun was almost gone. Darkness was setting in. Cold sweat trickled down my spine. Oh, do you hear that? Huh? A voice. A song? I froze. Focusing everything on my hearing. Then I heard it. A song. Coming from the bushes just a few meters ahead. Slowly getting closer. A high-pitched, eerie melody. Like some kind of twisted folk song. The words were unintelligible, but the dread they carried was undeniable. My chest tightened. Just hearing it made me feel like everything was pointless. Like life itself was a mistake. Listen to me. Keep the flashlight aimed at its feet. Uncle yelled. My hands shook as I obeyed, pointing the beam at the ground. The bushes rustled. Something stepped out. Feet. Completely hairless, unnaturally pale. It twisted its entire body grotesquely as it moved forward. The song. The song was making my brain feel like it was unraveling. For a split second, my mind blanked out. I lost myself. And the thing kept coming. Part 7. I screamed. My uncle gasped. The thing crouched down, shifting onto all fours, moving its face right into the beam of the flashlight that was aimed at its feet. I saw it directly. The same unbearable feeling from before rushed over me. Die, 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 I'd rather be dead than see that face. My uncle, overwhelmed, dropped his bottle and began to sob uncontrollably. The fallen flashlight now illuminated the creature's full form. It sang in that eerie, incomprehensible voice, crawling forward like a newborn foal, its body writhing unnaturally. In its right hand, it clutched a rusted sickle. I thought about biting off my own tongue, choosing death over this horror, when suddenly, bing! My uncle's phone rang. His sobbing stopped abruptly, his body freezing in place. Slowly, as if in a trance, he reached into his down jacket and pulled out his phone. Why now? Why the hell is he looking at his phone at a time like this? We're about to die. The phone kept ringing. Bing! My uncle stared at the screen, unmoving. The creature turned toward me. I lost control, I wet myself. I'm going to die. Then my uncle roared. A deep, raw, animalistic sound. He lunged forward, grabbing the flashlight from the ground. In the same motion, he snatched up my abandoned bottle. Don't look at it. I'll shine the light on its face, keep your eyes shut. I threw myself onto the ground, rolling away, gripping my head, my sunglasses knocked off. I squeezed my eyes shut. What happened next was something my uncle later told me. First, he aimed the flashlight directly at its face, ensuring he knew where it was without looking at it directly. Then, this part is disgusting, but it saved us. He uncapped the bottle, brought it to his lips, and filled his mouth with the urine inside. Keeping the light trained on the thing's face, he crouched down, and in the instant before he spat, he shut his eyes. A fine mist sprayed out, covering its face. The creature shrieked. A high-pitched, horse-like scream. He spat again. And again. Directly into its single eye. Part 8. The creature let out an even higher, more piercing scream than before. But, it was still there. In a moment of desperation, my uncle stripped off his pants and underwear, then shone the flashlight directly onto his exposed groin. It must have seen it. I couldn't understand the words, but the thing let out a guttural, hate-filled stream of curses, like some kind of ancient, unspeakable malediction. Then, without hesitation, it spun around, turning its back to us. At that moment, I finally lifted my head. My uncle's flashlight cast a beam over its retreating form. But what terrified me the most wasn't that it was leaving. It was how it left. Even in retreat, the creature continued its eerie, droning song, its body writhing in unnatural undulations as it moved, slowly, ever so slowly, at the pace of a frail old man with a walking stick. We stood frozen, tracking it with the flashlight, not daring to look away, waiting for the moment it might turn back. The agonizing, nightmarish crawl continued, stretching time into eternity. And then, at last, it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Neither of us spoke as we trudged back to the lodge, our bodies heavy with exhaustion and lingering fear. Once inside, my uncle checked every lock on every door, making sure we were secure. Then he brewed coffee. He took a slow sip before finally breaking the silence. So, that's what you meant by breaking its interest? Probably. Yeah. He exhaled, shaking his head. Not gonna lie, though, my dick shriveled up to a pathetic little nub. Despite everything, he let out a dry chuckle. And then, in the dim glow of the lodge, he started telling me about Joshi, the Evil Eye. Part 9. Uncle was a marine engineer. A technical specialist who often traveled overseas for work. One day, while stationed in a small town in northern Europe, he made friends with another engineer. A local who also spoke Japanese fluently. One evening, this friend grinned and said, "Wanna see something interesting?" Uncle shrugged, expecting something along the lines of a strip show or black market trade. But instead, his friend led him down a narrow, deserted alley. At the end of the alley, there was a tiny, run-down shack. It looked abandoned, barely standing. "Is this some kind of joke?" Uncle muttered. But his friend beckoned him inside. And the moment Uncle stepped through the door, he realized the outside was alight. The interior was lavish. An ornate Persian carpet, antique vases, shelves filled with gold and silver trinkets. The air was thick with the sweet scent of incense. "The hell is this place?" Uncle whispered. But before he could ask further, he was guided deeper inside. Into a small candlelit room. There sat a man in his 60s. Dressed in traditional attire, still and silent. What struck Uncle most was, even indoors at night, this man wore dark sunglasses. "Who's he?" Uncle asked. His friend smirked. "A man with the apostrophe. Joshi the Evil Eye." The concept of the evil eye exists in many cultures worldwide. It's believed that, by glaring at a person with malice, one can curse them. The effects range from illness, mental deterioration, unnatural accidents, and, in extreme cases, death. Sounds like bullshit, Uncle scoffed. The man probably was some charlatan, a street magician trying to scam foreigners. The old man leaned in and whispered something to the translator. The translator chuckled and turned to Uncle. "You don't believe, huh? Fine, he'll give you a small demonstration." Uncle raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Then, the old man whispered again. The translator's smile faded. "Before he begins, you must be tied down." Uncle frowned. "Why?" "For your safety. Once he looks at you, you will struggle. You will panic. This is for your own good." Uncle scoffed, but agreed. They tied him to a chair. His arms, his legs, tightly. Then, the old man removed his sunglasses. "Now," the translator said, "he will only look at you for a second." Uncle laughed at first. Then, the old man raised his head, and their eyes met. Just for 1 second. And in that single moment, Uncle understood everything. His soul was being devoured. A pressure, unlike anything he had ever felt, crushed his entire being. It was like falling into an abyss. No, worse. Like being ripped apart at the seams. Like something was crawling into his skull and twisting his mind inside out. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't scream. His vision darkened. And then, in a snap, it was over. Uncle gasped for air, drenched in cold sweat. His arms and legs ached. He had struggled so violently, he nearly broke the chair. The old man calmly put his sunglasses back on. The translator looked at Uncle and smirked. "So? Still think it's fake?" Uncle couldn't speak. For the first time in his life, he had felt pure, uncontrollable fear. Even now, years later. Just recalling that moment sent shivers down his spine. And then, he sighed and looked at me. "That thing in the mountain. I don't know what the hell it was. But the moment we locked eyes, it was the same as back then. I felt my blood run cold. Then, that thing had, too?" Uncle shook his head. "Not just that. It was worse. Because unlike that man in Europe, it wanted to kill us." Part 10. My uncle had assumed there must be some kind of trick involved. Maybe the man's eyes were deformed or mutilated, or perhaps he was wearing colored contact lenses. Maybe there was even something in the incense, some kind of hallucinogenic compound that could cloud the mind. He had reservations about being tied up, but his friend, the local man, was someone he trusted completely. So, despite his unease, he agreed. Bound to a chair, my uncle watched as the man approached. His friend turned away. Silently, the man removed his sunglasses. He gazed down at my uncle. "I swear to you, it was the exact same feeling I had today when I saw that thing." My uncle set his coffee cup down on the table with a quiet clink. "The moment I looked into his eyes, I wanted to die. It wasn't just fear, it was like every ounce of joy, every reason for existing, just vanished." His eyes weren't even particularly strange. Just normal human eyes. And yet, in that instant, I felt like life itself was meaningless. It had only lasted a second or two. But that was all it took. His friend later explained that the man with the Joshi, the evil eye, was an assassin for hire. If you had enough money, he would kill for you. In fact, he was rumored to have been involved in power struggles between rival criminal organizations, his deadly gaze used as a weapon in their underworld conflicts. About a week before my uncle left the country, news spread that the man had been killed. Apparently, he had disobeyed orders, undermining the power of the organization he belonged to. In retaliation, they had executed him. His body was found inside a brothel, tied to a chair. The floor was covered in filth, excrement, urine, every kind of human waste imaginable. And despite being bound, he had somehow summoned the strength to snap the ropes apart, only to claw out his own eyes and die. Part final. We didn't waste any more time. As soon as we finished talking, we packed our bags and got the hell out of there. The road down the mountain was silent. The car's headlights barely cut through the thick fog. Neither of us looked back. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the gravel crunching under the tires, and the occasional rustling in the trees. I kept my eyes forward, gripping the seatbelt tight. "It's over. It's over. It's over." I kept repeating it in my head, trying to convince myself. Then, just as we reached the bottom of the mountain, the car radio crackled to life. A high-pitched, warbling voice started singing. A twisted, eerie melody. Uncle and I froze. Our breath caught. A cold sweat ran down my back. It was the same song. Turn it off. Uncle's hands were shaking as he reached for the dial. But the volume knob wouldn't move. The song grew louder. It filled the car. It clawed into my ears. My stomach twisted in knots. I shut my eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. And then... BZZZT. The radio cut off. Silence. The car kept rolling down the highway. The fog cleared. And suddenly... the weight in my chest lifted. I looked over at Uncle. His face was pale, but he was grinning. He let out a deep, shaky breath. And finally, laughed. We made it. I didn't reply. I just nodded. Because somehow... I knew it too. That thing... wasn't following us anymore. Epilogue. Uncle sold the cabin the next month. We never spoke about that night again. Not to family. Not to friends. Not to anyone. But sometimes. Even now, years later, I still hear it. That twisted melody. That sick, unnatural song. Whispering, somewhere just out of reach. And in those moments, even in the safety of my own home, I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching me.